Hi, I'm David Spencer. Welcome to Gardening with Bugs. The last slug bait you will ever use. The last slug bait you will ever need is based on Oregon State's new publication looking at field control of slugs using simple, inexpensive products, because some of the ones that are effective, that are off the shelf at a hardware store, for example, do not translate to large yards. It just becomes too expensive. It's cost prohibitive. So the simplest one, the most effective one that they came up with a study comparing all sorts of fermenting foods and whatnot, was simple bread dough. They know that you probably have flour in your yard, in your house. You probably have yeast. You've got water for sure. Those three things in some sort of container is what's attracting the slugs. So I had the opportunity to try that here in the yard. Luckily, I brew my own beer, so I had a very inexpensive comparison to make. And so I used water as a control, just straight beer, beer with bread dough, and bread dough by itself. Now, bread dough, that term, and that's what was used in the publication, to me means some sort of malleable thing that you're going to throw in the oven and cook. But what I wanted to do was add enough moisture so that it was luring them and then drowning them as well, like we do with beer traps, which I've used fairly successfully in the past. And the results were as predicted. The bread dough and the bread dough with the beer were better than the beer itself, and the water had no slug death whatsoever. So that makes me think that it really is the bread dough. Interestingly enough, when both were at their peak fermentation, so as soon as I put the beer in there and the carbon dioxide was off gassing, or as the fermentation of the bread dough began, they were attracting things like mosquitoes, which are attracted to carbon dioxide because that's how they can find animals who are obviously exhaling it. So remember that for the summer. Maybe this is a good trap to attract some and kill some mosquitoes. But there you have it, a simple method. And the reason they're promoting it is not only was it effective, they suggested it has an 8-day lifespan out in the yard. So it gives you lots of time to set it and forget it and not really renew that bread dough until the following week. And it's cheap. Everybody has it. You have flour at home. You've probably got yeast. If you're not making bread in the COVID era, I suggest you start it. And obviously a little bit of water, and that's all you need to activate it. Now, some people have added sugar. All that does is speed up the fermentation process. So that's great, especially I should have been doing that. I didn't do it now, but because the temperatures are cold, the fermentation is either stalled or it's quite slow. Regardless, I'm attracting it and killing slugs. But a little bit of sugar or allowing it to sit at room temperature in your house before, like overnight maybe, and then setting it out will kind of get that fermentation process going. So if you're not familiar with the fermentation process, it's quite simple. Yeast convert sugars into a whole bunch of byproducts, but primarily we're looking at carbon dioxide and alcohol in some cases. And so we believe that the slugs are attracted to that mixture of the sugar and the fermenting, probably all the other flavors that come with it as well that make beer so good. And that's all you have to do. You just have to add these things together, mix it. It's just like magic. It happens on its own. So I'll walk you through what we did in the yard here. I started this simple test. I just sort of put these cups, half buried them into the soil so that the slugs didn't have to crawl up quite as high to get into it. And I just kind of like put them around some of the plants that were already established that I knew would be magnets for the slugs. So I've got here like spinach and lettuce and arugula. And then I replicated this a couple times where I just moved the positions around just in case the slugs were kind of coming from one direction and we're going into one of the traps more than the other. But as you can see here, now I've created a line of them because I'm worried that they're coming from maybe last year's side of the garden and moving into this new one that I've prepared. It doesn't seem to be the case so far. It seems like the closer I have them to the plants that are attracting them, the better. And that's really the drawback of this trapping, or all slug trapping, is that it really has to be more attractive than the plants in order to get perfect control. And I just don't think that's ever going to happen. Plants go through like different temperatures, different amounts of light. They're producing different chemical compounds that we don't really notice, but a lot of these insects and slugs probably do as well. Or they're producing wavelengths, like they might be visually stimulated by some of those plants. So we'll never be able to attract them all. So this really probably does have a major implication of how you put it out. So I'm using these cups half buried. I've thought about using a large one, like a bowl. I might give it a shot. Otherwise, I was trying to think of maybe a way to get like a pipe cut in half with the end sealed to make it sort of a longer and linear one. The only problem with that, as soon as you get big and complicated, then it makes it more complicated to switch it out. So my other option is sticking with these solo cups here. It's easy to just dump them out. I mean, what I'm dumping out is dead slugs and bread, so I can just throw them in the compost or on the ground. Rats are another issue for another episode, but that's what I have been doing anyways, because there's nothing wrong with just letting that sit in the garden. It's not like adding some of the metals like we have done in the past, where eventually those do build up. They're not really going anywhere in your yard. So there you have it, the last slug bait you'll ever use. Give it a try. It's worked for me. So I made them clear just so it's easier when you dig them up, or you pull them up, you can see if it's actually working. Otherwise, like a red solo cup or something, that's fine. There's no reason to use plastic if you've got something else. It's just that we tend to forget about them. So if it's just my coffee mug, I might be looking for it later. So this one's just the flour, just the dough. This is it. I basically just dig it down. I don't want them to have to climb up the whole height of the cup. A little bit's probably fine, but so we're just going to dig it down a little bit, pack the dirt around it, make it a bit easier for them to crawl up. Typically what I would do is spread these out, like maybe one per bed or one per kind of section. My beds are 5 feet by 15, so for me visually it's kind of a 3 5x5 squares. So in the past I've considered it that way, and one per 5 foot square, but we've also just done one per bed. Some of the other real common ones I hear about are crushed eggshells and diatomaceous earth. Now, I'll group those together just to talk about them quickly, because in the case of both of them, the idea is that they are sharp and that something like a slug won't want to crawl across it. This has been disproven so many times that slugs have no problem going across it. When it's really fine, it's annoying. If they want to go across, they will. If that's enough of a deterrent, that's fine too. So there's no reason not to. I mean, putting eggshells in your garden is a benefit anyways. You're just adding calcium. It's just a natural ingredient anyways. It'll break down relatively quickly. As in terms of diatomaceous earth, same thing. There's no harm in it going in the garden, so why not? But the second that gets wet, it turns into a paste and it's completely useless anyways. It's a bit oversold in my opinion. It really has limited applications, but when it does work, it does work. So some people are happy with that one. One year here at Full Circle Farm, the lawnmower broke over the winter. We couldn't get it going, and on the west coast here, the grass starts growing quite quickly. So we ended up with really tall grass quite late into the spring, later than we would have liked. And the slugs that year were awful. So for us, the main thing besides some of these traps is keeping the grass really short between the beds. Now, I never even wanted to put grass on the ground between the beds, but we decided it was best just for the purpose of walking on it and having kids. Ideally, I wanted something like clover that was a bit more beneficial to the soil, had flowers that was beneficial for some of the insects. But regardless, anything like that, you are harboring all sorts of sort of grass pests or lawn pests anyways. So to keep that in mind, a lot of people will put things like gravel or bark mulch down, which is fine. I just find that's a bit annoying because you'll always have to add more, or else it starts to look untidy itself as it gets dirty. And the idea of having something growing here and absorbing some of the excess water, to me, was a better option.